Brilliant. So, can we welcome Athena Jane Churchill-Shorby.
Never mind. Okay. Hello. It's very lovely that you can be here for my funeral. It's lovely. I'm not sure if you realised you were coming to it, but it's very nice to see you nonetheless. I see some familiar faces, which is absolutely lovely that you're here. Hello. Thanks for being here. I see some less familiar faces, but I didn't know Jane knew any of you, but it's very lovely that you'd be here anyway, so thank you very much. So, without further ado, is it that one? Yes. Hello. So, dearly beloved, I'm going to have to kind of refer to my notes because this is quite a long story and I've got to fit it into 15 minutes because it would be really dreadful if anyone ran over, as Tim said. So I'm going to go for it. So, dearly beloved, it's wonderful to see so many of you here. And I'd like to say a very huge thank you to Tim for the opportunity to be here to share my life, death and rebirth with you all. And I'd like to thank the Coffin Club of Hastings. That was they're amazing. I thoroughly recommend that should any of you ever need that at any point. I don't know if you would, but it was a very odd experience, I must say. Quite glad to get out. I don't think anyone tells you it's very hot in there. And you could die in a coffin if you weren't already out. I would also like to say a huge thank you to my mystery pallbearers. Probably close friends, family, I don't know. It's lovely of you, thank you. And finally, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Piano Man Dan. Thank you for playing me in so brilliantly. And thank you for the trip down memory lane. It did remind me of a very early brush with childhood tragedy, an early brush with death. The funeral march was the first piece that I ever learned to play on the piano. I say learnt, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I think what I did was I played the bass notes with 2 fingers over and over again for quite some time, which I imagine was hugely popular in my family. Anyway, I received the news of the death of my pet fish, Binkle, and I played that piece for him before parading down the garden to bury him. Him in a Ferrero Rocher box, me dressed as a ringmaster with a curly moustache drawn on the top lip in my mum's eyeliner pencil. It was indeed a very sad occasion. The next day we got a new fish, and I called him Binkle. And to be fair, he didn't last long either. And after that, I think there was Binkle, and Binkle. And it was about then I began to wonder, could it be that I was jinxing my fish with this particular name? So the next 2, Silvery Sparkly, that's it. They didn't last long either, and after that, I gave up on fish. So anyway, without further ado, dear beloved, we're here to celebrate Jane's most recent life. And I'm going to ask the person who knows Jane best to say a few words about her early life. You may be waiting for somebody else, but it's me. So, what can I say about Jane? She was an artist. She'd always lived her life as an artist, making her living from art and from her creativity. She worked in many media across many art forms. Theatre set design, she created installations, she exhibited as a visual artist. She created murals, mosaics, sculpture, she worked with museum collections, she created experiences, journeys through imaginary worlds, and she had lots of success, including some Arts Council funding and HLF funding. She ran hundreds of schools projects, workshops with communities, transformed schools with art. She was an artist with a housing association for over 12 years, delivering engagement through the arts. She curated a gallery for 6 years, hanging hundreds of shows, and she ran a lantern parade. She loved it all. She loved working with people. One of Jane's abilities was to see and inspire the creative process and shape it intuitively, not just the organisation she worked with, but for each individual in each project, helping them to access their creativity. In 2017, her project, Echoes Across the Century, received some HLS funding and was exhibited at the Guildhall Art Gallery in London as the culmination of a 3-year process. To be fair, it was about 7 years. It had been rolling on forever, but the big process working with 220 young people and working with schools was probably about 3 years. She used her artwork to inspire this installation, and then she worked with 14 livery companies, 12 schools, and many young people, and then curated over 800 pieces of their work into one final installation. To the outside eye, it looked as if she was living her dream life, but on the inside, it no longer felt quite right. So in January 2019, nearly 2 years ago, my very darling, beautiful friend and mentor, my guiding light, Julia, the most loving and enlightening truth speaker I have ever met, and who has worked intensively in my life with me for 18 years, asked me a very important question. She said, if you dropped dead tomorrow, what would you regret? She's here, so I can fully... So she's here. Sorry. So I better watch what I say now. I realised that actually, despite doing all these things that I'd loved at the time, I hadn't really got my art out. I hadn't expressed something that was sort of deep within me. I hadn't got it out in the world in the way that I wanted. So I think there were things living in me that had lived there forever, and I knew that I wanted to express myself from the core, through my art, but not just in my art, in my own whole life. So I wanted to travel, both externally and within. I wanted to have more fun. I wanted to wear costumes like I used to when I was a child. I wanted to have a tiara, not that it stays on. I wanted to create this labyrinth project, a project that would see me create a world of chambers and corridors, fill them full of my art, and all inspired by sacred and ancient sites, devotional places and shrines. But really, I wanted it to be the journey of my life's path, expressed through art. I wanted to find true love within, and by that I mean I wanted to experience the fulfilment of living a life of love, truth, consciousness, creativity and freedom that I believed might be possible for me. And to do that, I needed to let go of what I'd been taught, which was the only way that to be really safe and to be really loved was to be a good girl, was to move energetically always to accommodate the needs of others before the things I most wanted to do. It was sort of an immediate, energetic response and a pattern I had really been working with at the court for 20 years. It had taken all that time. So it's like I'd gone to sleep, age 27, with all of life ahead of me, and suddenly I'd woken up with a jolt, age 43, with me feeling a lot more of a banana than I'd hoped. And I'd never really been able to drop that pattern that had limited my life, so I wasn't quite where I wanted to be. So Julia said, all right, instead of dropping dead tomorrow, what would happen if you had 20 months? You died instead on the 15th of September 2020. What would you do differently? What would you change? What might you do? I've always been aware that this life is short. But with the early death of my father 6 years ago, and then the severe illness of my mother, who had Parkinson's and then tipped over into dementia, on the night of his funeral, actually, is when it all began. It's a whole other talk, but that's been a huge process for me. And I suppose through all of that, I'd become more aware that one day I will die. We will all die. And none of us know quite when. So I decided that for 20 months, I would try to live as consciously as I could. If I was going to die in 20 months, then what would I want to do with the time I had left? And how could I kill off that old pattern that was limiting and be reborn, living more fully and truthfully into a new life on the 15th of September. Well, Nothing focuses the mind like a deadline. And now I had one. So I decided if I was going to die, I'd spend any money I had. I wouldn't leave it in savings, I'd want to use it. And that I would therefore spend any money I had in that marvellous 20 months in order to go for it. I would spend it on art materials unreservedly. I would spend it on inner development because I really wanted to grow. And I would travel, and if I wanted to go somewhere, I'd go. And that my travels during that time would be silent retreats into myself as I worked with the idea of not wanting to die with any regrets. If you had asked me what I thought might happen in 20 months, I might have thought all sorts of things, but I didn't expect that my darling mum would actually still be going strong, that lockdown would cancel absolutely everything, that I wouldn't be exhibiting as I had planned and made projects all over the country, and who would have thought that I would spend 10 months making 250 small sparkly birds, which you'll see later. It started well, this process. In February 2019, I went on my first trip to Venice, and I'm always free and inspired there. And I walk endlessly. I love psychogeography, the getting lost on purpose. I've sort of done that since it was part of my art practice, I think, from when I was about 18, 19. I write, I walk endlessly, and I draw, and get inspired by the place. But of course, when I came back from that trip, which was a week long, I was immediately straight into a big London schools project. And the freedom to do my own work that I'd been experiencing evaporated in 4 a.m. starts, long days, and giving my energy to help students create art to transform their school. I travelled as often as I could, even at that early stage. I went on an intensive core development in Spain with Julia in April, when I remember I visited an art gallery and cried because I thought it's just not possible for me to do that. But that was the part of the process. Then I'd go back into the schools project. I loved it whilst I was doing it, but somehow some of the enjoyment had gone. But when it was done, I was at last in my studio. And in May 2019, I began to exhibit ideas from the labyrinth, which were beginning to emerge, along with the first chamber in this huge project that I had in my head. I planned a Gloucestershire exhibition. In July 2019, I visited Bergamo. In August, it was France. And in October 2019, I went to live in Venice for a month. A long, silent retreat, broken only, it seemed, to order coffee and to spend inordinate amounts of time searching for emulsion paint. Apparently I was asking for paint emotional, which would be quite apt. And they didn't know what I meant. Bubble wrap, cardboard boxes, which is Scatolina Grandi, should you ever need any big cardboard boxes. And I had many an argument with the Italian Postal Service about whether sending home 4 boxes of silver foil hands constituted a work of art or just a lot of screwed up pieces of aluminium foil. But importantly, I made art every day. I was in heaven, my kind of heaven. I drew, I painted, and then there was always a death in Venice, my own. I had an illness process in the body in which I coughed until I couldn't breathe, and at night I was regularly woken by a stranglehold, just literally holding my throat. But I was actually so happy I was living my dream life. I didn't care I was ill at all. It was part of this process of clearing out the stranglehold of limiting patterns. And what started to emerge from me creatively was I started to make birds, these little birds. I had started the birds in Venice. I carried on when I visited Rome in November, and then I just couldn't stop. The labyrinth, which will be chambers and corridors linked that you walk through and get lost in, full of beautiful art that feels like shrines and devotional sites. I guess it's telling me now that one of the shrines is going to be full of birds. And just as the birds emerged from within, so too did other things. Including things like learning Italian. I've always wanted to learn Italian. It was one of the things on my list, and I just began half an hour a day, half an hour a day. I'm now a year on, and I've nearly finished a course, and I'm like, oh, how did that even happen? By magic, it seems. When I returned, I realised that although going away was an amazing feeling of freedom, what I really wanted was to be free of the inner constraints inside and be able to make art and be anywhere. And as soon as I got back from my travels, the feeling of freedom receded, and I could see ever more clearly where I was limiting myself and where I was holding on and not letting go. So I planned that from December 2019 and into the summer of 2020, I would just make art in the studio, which was rather lucky, because lockdown came and everything else got cancelled within about 3 days. But inside, I couldn't actually have been happier. I ran, I walked, I meditated, I had time to be with myself, I had time to make. I loved it. And in March 2020, with only 6 months left to go of my life, I refound my imaginary friend, Bremner, on long walks in the woods. We began again to have miniature art adventures once more. Bremner had accompanied me on a trip when I was about 23, getting lost around Britain, in which I had got lost a lot. And I visited many ancient and sacred sites, chalk horses, ruins, tours, Stonehenge, Woodhenge. So really, for me, lockdown just enabled me, with a lack of any other distraction, to be at all distracted from my path. So as the world locked down, my creativity felt like it was blossoming, and from March until August, I pretty much just made little birds, the symbol of freedom and flight. It was not really what I did in that time. It was much more about the inner process that mattered, to be aware of where I was afraid of dying with those regrets. And so here we are in September 2020, and, dearly beloved, come the final moments of Athena Jane's life. She always said that death would come on a white horse, but again, she really hadn't imagined this. On September the 15th, she climbed a hill to the ancient Bronze Age horse and spent the night upon the symbol of the goddess of the white horse, who is also Epona. I don't know if you know, but she's also linked to birds. She lay down on one life under the singing stars, and the wind blew through her and washed her bones clean, and she wished upon the shooting stars overhead, and awoke in a new life with the possibility of a new beginning. So as our celebration comes to a close, it seems fitting to end with Jane's own words, written in a letter to herself in the strange possible event of her death. "Dear Jane," she wrote, "if you're reading this, then I'm dead. But if you're reading this, then I'm alive. So either this is the afterlife or you're reborn after death. Either way, that's lucky, because it turns out you needed a lot longer than 20 months. And if the afterlife is eternal, that's pretty good news. You've got a lot of work to do. So did you achieve what you hoped? In truth, it has taken you the 20 months to really become aware of the pattern of accommodating that runs through everything. Only these last 2 days, you've had a huge process as death approached. You can see it now with clearer eyes, but you'll need the next 20 months to keep going. You're at the bottom of the mountain with a very long way to climb. But all there is to do is to keep going. Your soul has always asked you to keep finding your way through art, because it's the place that shows you your truth, and it takes you inwards on your path. And you are on the path, the one you've always known was yours to tread since you were a little girl. And my advice would be to let her speak, that little girl, because she always knew, and she always does know. And as you say goodbye to one life of 45 years and begin the next, it is the fool's journey. We go off in innocent wonder to find ourselves back at the beginning, knowing what we knew as a child as if for the first time. And off we go again. At any moment, we can choose to be reborn to a new life of possibility, but it isn't that simple, this human life. The patterns can be really hard and can take a lifetime, or in your case, Jane, more than one. But in being on the path, no matter how far along it you have walked, at least I died yesterday, happy knowing that I had at least begun. And knowing that all I can do is to keep going on this creative journey within. Love from Athena Jane. P.S. Oh yeah, by the way, as this is the afterlife, Binkle says hello.